In the summer of 2005, Sharon Millerman was sitting on the back steps of her house, talking to a friend on a cordless phone. The sky darkened, signaling an approaching storm, and soon, thunder rumbled as raindrops began to fall lightly. Although Sharon noticed the worsening weather, she paid little attention to it, thinking it was just a typical rainstorm. Suddenly, a deafening crack sounded, like the shattering of the sky, and a bolt of lightning tore through the air, striking her right arm. The excruciating burning pain flooded her body immediately. Every muscle contracted, and her skin burned as if on fire. The lightning coursed through her body, traveled to the ground, under the house, and ended in a loud explosion that caused the transformer in front of her house to burst. The world around her seemed to melt away in unimaginable agony. Time appeared to stand still for a moment. Sharon felt like her body had reached its limit. But unexpectedly, in a fleeting instant, the pain vanished. She felt weightless, as though the burden of her entire body had been lifted. Sharon did not realize what had happened until she looked down and saw her own body still sitting on the step, silent and lifeless. Her soul, like a wisp of smoke, separated from her body, but she was unaware of it. Confused, Sharon tried to understand what was happening. She had no idea that she had died. Her soul hovered in the air, observing the scene below in bewilderment. The charred marks were clearly visible on the steps where she had been sitting, smoke still rising from the transformer, and her body was motionless. Sharon wanted to scream, wanted to call for help, but no sound came out. She began to move, almost reflexively, heading into the house. The surroundings gradually changed, but they did not resemble the home she once knew. Everything was bathed in a burnt golden hue, as if scorched. Every piece of furniture and every corner of the house felt strange and unfamiliar. The kitchen curtains weren't hers, nor were the dining room chairs. Though it was her house, everything inside it seemed entirely different. Sharon couldn't understand what was happening, and a growing sense of panic began to take over her mind. The radio began to play, emitting old music from the 1920s and 1930s, but Sharon couldn't locate the source. She wondered how there could be sound when the house had clearly lost power due to the transformer explosion. Everything seemed increasingly surreal. Fear crept in, as if she were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Just as Sharon felt on the verge of panic, a gigantic presence enveloped her with an overwhelming sense of peace. The being had no specific form, just an invisible but incredibly loving presence. Worries dissipated instantly. Sharon felt reassured that everything would be fine, and fear left her entirely. Her soul began to move with this presence, neither upward nor downward, horizontally through space, swiftly moving forward. Pink and golden clouds floated past her eyes, unveiling a wondrous journey she had never imagined she would experience. Sharon continued to be guided by the invisible presence, gliding through the pink and golden clouds quickly but gently. The surrounding space was filled with soft light, and the sky no longer held storm clouds. Instead, warm, soothing rays of light filled the air. Sharon felt as though everything around her was embracing and protecting her, bringing her an unparalleled sense of peace. She had no idea where she was. She no longer felt any fear or confusion, just complete trust in the entity guiding her. As Sharon and the presence reached the end of the clouds, an extraordinarily beautiful garden appeared before her, more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The sky was a flawless, clear blue, without a single cloud. The air was sweet and refreshing, as if it contained the purity of the entire universe. The colors in the garden were so vibrant, but they were unlike any colors Sharon could describe with words. The pinks were pinker, the reds were redder, and the yellows shone as brightly as sunlight. Sharon was overwhelmed by the pristine beauty and perfection of this new world, a world seemingly untouched by destruction or sorrow. Birds sang from the lush green branches, their songs blending with the rustling of the leaves in the breeze, creating a soothing, serene melody. Sharon could only stand there, awestruck by what she was witnessing. She didn't know where she was, but the garden felt familiar to her, as though she had known this place long before she could even comprehend it. As she stood in wonder, two men emerged from the garden and approached her. They wore fine, beautifully woven linen garments, and the light radiating from them made them appear like angels. At first, Sharon thought they were angels coming to take her to heaven. But suddenly, a wave of understanding, like divine knowledge, struck her. These were not angels. They were her two brothers, who had passed away as infants. Sharon remembered the family story of how her two brothers had died when she was too young to remember them. She had never met them while they were alive, but now she recognized them immediately. They smiled at her, and in their smiles, Sharon saw the resemblance to their father when he was young. Brothers were youthful, beautiful, and radiant, as though time had never touched them. Sharon was overcome with emotion, unable to speak. The love and joy she felt upon reuniting with her long-lost brothers overwhelmed her. "Dad would be so proud of you," she said to them through tears. Tears not of sorrow, but of happiness and peace. Her brothers simply smiled warmly, a smile as radiant as the sun in the heavenly garden. In that moment, all of Sharon's fears and doubts about her fate vanished. When her brothers told her she had died, Sharon felt a profound sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't afraid, nor was she confused. Instead, she accepted it with serenity and trust. Here, in this garden, she felt completely loved and embraced as never before. After accepting the truth of her passing, Sharon began to notice a change within herself. She looked down and saw herself in a different, more beautiful, more complete than she had ever been while alive. Every strand of her hair, every detail of her body was clearer and more radiant. She could feel each blade of grass beneath her feet, smell the sweet fragrance of freshly cut grass. All of her senses seemed heightened, and everything around her felt more vibrant than ever. Sharon stood in the heavenly garden, where everything gleamed with radiant light, feeling waves of love and peace flowing through her being. Her two brothers stood beside her, their light exuding a purity she had never seen before. They smiled gently, and their eyes shone with infinite understanding and love. Sharon felt as though she was immersed in a family reunion, unlike any she had ever experienced. This feeling was more than a simple meeting. It was a reunion that transcended time and space. Sharon felt as if she remembered all the memories she had never had with her brothers. Although she had never met them in life, she felt a profound connection with them, as though their souls had always been present in her life, just waiting for this moment to be revealed. She embraced them in her heart, sensing an eternal bond, a love without conditions that she had never known. "Dad would be so proud of you," Sharon said, tears filling her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of happiness and peace. Her brothers only smiled, and in that instant, Sharon realized that she had truly died. This realization didn't bring fear or confusion. Rather, she accepted it as a natural part of life's journey. When they told her she had passed, Sharon nodded without hesitation. Instead of feeling shocked or overwhelmed, she felt as though she had been prepared for this all along. The loving entity she had met, the presence of her brothers, and the radiant heavenly garden, all these things brought her a sense of safety and peace. She had nothing to fear because she knew she was where she belonged. As Sharon accepted her death, she began to notice a significant change in herself. She looked down at her body and realized that she was no longer the same person she had known. Her hair was longer, shinier, and gleamed in the sunlight. Her skin, free of the marks of time or the fatigue of earthly life, was smooth and flawless. Sharon saw herself as a better version of herself, as though she had been cleansed and reborn. When she looked down, She could feel each blade of grass soft beneath her feet, and the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. All of her senses were sharper. She could see farther without having to turn her head, sense everything more deeply and clearly. She felt like she was in a state that no living person could ever achieve, a state of absolute perfection. She began walking, and her two brothers followed, guiding her deeper into the garden. As she walked, Sharon began to meet other people. They came from different time periods. Some wore elegant clothes from bygone eras, long dresses and ornate coats, while others dressed more modernly, as she had seen in her daily life. Although she didn't know exactly who they were, Sharon felt a strong connection to each of them. They seemed familiar, yet at the same time, distant, as if they were souls she had met in a previous life. None of the people in the group were old or suffering. All were youthful, healthy, and glowing. Not a single one was crying or showed any sign of pain or illness. Sharon noticed that everyone was between their late 20s and early 30s, a peak of physical maturity and vitality. These people were not just there. They radiated love and acceptance toward Sharon. She felt as though she was not only part of her family, but part of a much larger community, a community to which she belonged. They gathered around her without saying a word, but their eyes and presence conveyed everything. They loved her, welcomed her, and celebrated her arrival in their world. Sharon felt enveloped in a love unlike anything she had ever experienced on earth. She knew she had died, but she also knew that death was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new journey. At that moment, the loving, enormous presence reappeared, no longer standing beside Sharon, but behind her, shielding her. Sharon's brothers stood on either side of her, and the group of people around her began to gather together, preparing for a significant moment, the review of her life. Sharon felt a slight tension as she prepared to face her past, but instead of being afraid, she knew that this was not a judgment. She wouldn't be punished or evaluated. It was simply a review of all that she had experienced. Everything unfolded quickly, as if a black and white film were rewinding through her life. She saw herself as a child, with each small moment of her life flashing before her eyes, from her birth to the moment she died on the steps of her house. Her life appeared in a blink of an eye, in the span of a single instant. Sharon briefly thought, was my life really that boring? Something was missing. Sharon felt that there was an incomplete piece. She couldn't quite grasp what it was. She turned to her brothers and asked, "What's missing? Something doesn't feel right." But they only smiled and remained silent. Their silence carried a deeper meaning, something Sharon had yet to understand. After her gentle, loving life review, Sharon began to feel a deeper transformation within her soul. Enveloped by the loving presence she now knew to be God, Sharon felt as though an endless stream of knowledge began to flood her consciousness. This wasn't just a deeper understanding of herself or her past life. It was an expansion of her awareness of the universe and all that exists within it. Sharon felt connected to a source of eternal knowledge, a flow of wisdom she could never have imagined. Everything became clearer than ever before. She not only understood the nature of the actions she had taken in life, but she also realized that her actions, thoughts, and words far greater consequences than she had ever thought. The loving presence didn't speak with words, but Sharon could clearly sense its message. What you send out into the universe will come back to you. Sharon had heard about the law of cause and effect before, but now she experienced it on a completely new level. It wasn't just a simple teaching. It was the undeniable truth of how the universe functioned. She realized that every thought, word, and action of a person was like throwing a boomerang into the air. It would never stop spinning, gathering energy from the universe, and eventually return to the one who had cast it, often with much greater force. Sharon paused for a moment, reflecting on everything she had ever done, the words she had spoken, and how she had treated others. She felt as though she was standing in front of a mirror that reflected all her actions in life. There were moments when she felt proud, times when she had shown kindness, love, and helped others. But there were also times when she remembered moments of uncontrolled anger, hurtful words, and thoughtless actions. This feeling wasn't one of judgment, but rather a deep recognition of the relationship between human action and the functioning of the universe. Sharon realized that everything was interconnected, and nothing could escape this law. She understood that she needed to change, not just for herself, but for the harmony of the entire universe. The loving presence continued to guide Sharon through the heavenly garden. She walked through vibrant fields of flowers, listening to the breeze rustling through the trees, feeling the soft wind carrying the sweet scent of grass and flowers. But within her, profound transformation was taking place. She was no longer just a soul freshly separated from her body. She was becoming part of something greater, something vast and magnificent. Sharon realized that the loving presence was beginning to impart to her the knowledge of how the universe operated. It was an awareness of everything around her, of how all things were interconnected. From the tiny blades of grass beneath her feet to the distant stars in the sky, everything was part of a complete universal structure, where every existence had its own meaning and role. She felt as though she was being entrusted with the secrets of the universe, things she could never have understood while alive. This knowledge came to her naturally, without any need for explanation, as if it had always been within her, just waiting for the right moment to explode and be comprehended. Sharon was continuously amazed by the simplicity yet profound power of the truths she was being given. Everything she once thought was complex now appeared simple and clearer than ever. "You are truly magnificent," Sharon said to God, with awe and reverence flooding her heart. "You are wonderful and simple, yet we humans make everything so much more complicated." God didn't answer with words, but Sharon could feel agreement from the loving presence. She felt like a child learning to understand the world for the first time, but with clarity and maturity beyond what she had ever known. As she continued walking through the garden, Sharon began to hear music. It wasn't just the sound of a normal orchestra. It was what she called great music. Combination of many instruments, from strings and pianos to drums and instruments she had never seen before. But what amazed her the most was that it wasn't just the orchestra playing. Everything around her had its own sound. The rustling trees, the rocks beneath her feet, the babbling water, everything had a unique sound of its own. When these sounds combined, they created the most magnificent choir and symphony Sharon had ever heard in her life. Everything was singing praises to God. Sharon felt herself melting into the music, becoming part of the heavenly symphony. She no longer felt separate from the universe. Rather, she felt as though she had merged with everything around her. Every sound, every rhythm touched her soul, and she knew that this was how the world worked. A perfect harmony of all the elements of life, where every small part had its own role and meaning. Sharon walked through the fields of flowers, feeling the breath of the universe intertwining with her own. She thought she had fully merged with the heavenly garden, and that this would be where she would belong forever. But as she ventured deeper into the garden, she noticed a change in the air. Everything seemed quieter, and she began to sense that something unusual was approaching. Suddenly, two angels appeared beside Sharon. They didn't speak, but their eyes and presence conveyed that something important was about to happen. They gently guided her to a lake, a crystal-clear lake, so calm that she could see the sky reflected perfectly on its surface. This was no ordinary lake. Sharon sensed that it held something very special. When she leaned over to look into the water, what she saw shocked her. It wasn't the sky or the tranquility of the lake. It was Earth, the world she had just left behind. The scene before her was so clear that she felt she could touch the world just by reaching into the water. But the strangest part was that what she saw wasn't the past, it was the future. Before Sharon's eyes, a series of strange and troubling events unfolded. She saw a world in crisis. Currency collapsed and people scrambled in search of resources as chaos spread everywhere. Sharon witnessed violence, protests, and wars, all seemingly the result of the global financial system's collapse. Buildings crumbled, cities were left in ruins, and people suffered. The world she once knew was no longer recognizable. These scenes continued to play out, and Sharon felt as though she was being swept into a whirlwind of future events. She saw terrorist attacks, brutal assaults happening around the world. She saw nations, religions, and ethnic groups divided and in conflict. Everything seemed to spiral into chaos and destruction. As these images unfolded, Sharon felt fear rising within her. How could the world have come to this? She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. But before she could panic, one of the angels gently placed a hand on her shoulder, instilling her with a sense of calm. They whispered to her, not in words but through a spiritual communication, "These things don't have to happen." Sharon looked up at the angel, not fully understanding the meaning of the words. But the angel continued to explain. Everything she had just seen was the result of human selfishness, greed, and hatred. It was the consequence of people turning their backs on kindness, unity, and love for one another. Sharon realized that all she had seen was the outcome of the actions humans had sent out into the universe. Negative actions, hateful words, and selfish thoughts had created a turbulent flow, now returning to strike humanity. However, the angel emphasized that everything could still change. Humans have the ability to change their destiny. Angel communicate. These events are not set in stone. They can be avoided if people change the way they live. They learn to appreciate one another and return to love and compassion. Sharon understood that what she had witnessed was not an inevitable end, but a warning for humanity. People didn't change, these disasters would occur. But if they adjusted their behavior, living more kindly and lovingly, the future could be different. She felt a strong urge to return and warn everyone, to help them change the path they were on. At that moment, Sharon felt herself being pulled back. The vision of the future began to fade, and she felt as though she was leaving the lake. The angel stood beside her, gently guiding her away from the area. They said nothing more. Sharon knew that her journey here was coming to an end. She began to feel a powerful force pulling her back to the body she had left behind. As she looked back, the heavenly garden still appeared beautiful before. She knew that she couldn't stay. She couldn't remain in eternal peace and happiness, for her mission wasn't finished. She had something to do, something to say to the world, and she knew she had to return. The sensation of her body began to return. Sharon could feel the weight of her body, the muscles, and the beating of her heart as it gradually came back to life. This time, when she looked down, she no longer saw herself in her perfect. She had returned to her old body, with its scars, but the marks of time and the wounds that earthly life had left. Sharon felt the pain from the lightning strike still present, but this time she wasn't afraid. She now knew what awaited her on the other side, and she understood that everything had its purpose. She had been given a second chance, and she knew she had to use it to change the world, help people understand that their actions are greater consequences than they realize. When she opened her eyes, she was back in life. The world was still quiet. She knew she had been forever changed. Sharon Millerman had returned from death, carrying with her the lessons she needed to share with the world.